Okay, good morning. Good morning. I'm Tobias speaking. It's lovely to see so many faces in here. It looks like we've done well with our alluring panel of experts this morning. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm Tobias speaking. I'm the director of the International Cyber Policy Centre down in Canberra in Australia. As you can tell from my voice, I've newly arrived 2 years in Australia. I used to be in the UK. I used to work for the Royal United Services Institute in London, and that was where my love of cyber and critical infrastructure protection issues arose. Interesting, when you're thinking about the issues that we're going to deal with today, often your mind wanders off into the fantasy land of Hollywood films and disaster movies all over. And the kinds of scenarios that you're presented with there, often the worst case scenario is electrical supplies being taken down, dams destroyed, et cetera, and often I think you'd probably be drawn towards the kind of die-hard 4.0 scenario where you begin to see critical infrastructure systems taken down in disaster worldwide. And it all sounds like it's the realms of fantasy and all very scary, but perhaps not occurring in the real world. But then actually when you begin to look at some of the more famous instances of malware and viruses, when you look at Dooku Flame, Stuxnet most famously, often it involves some kind of targeting of critical infrastructure information systems. So perhaps it begins to put a little bit more reality on those Hollywood fantasies. And when you get into conversations with some of the big names, if you like, of the antivirus world, like Eugene Kaspersky, it seems his biggest concern, and a lot of their biggest concerns, are around critical infrastructure and especially the delivery of key services such as electrical supply. I always take those conversations with a pinch of salt because I'm thinking, well, there's certainly an economic requirement for these kinds of disasters to be depicted by these guys. They're going to make a lot of money out of solving all of your malware and virus problems by picturing those. But I mean, when you're looking at the critical infrastructure area, I mean, throughout the Cold War, there are always concerns around critical infrastructure, the physical critical infrastructure protection, be it invasion of the military, be it insider threats. That was the concern. Then you move to the 2000s, and the threat was of terrorism to critical infrastructure. And so still, physical protection measures were being taken. And now really it seems that, cyber threats to critical information, critical national infrastructure has really begun to take the forefront of people's thinking in their risk mitigation, certainly from certain areas, perhaps not within the utilities themselves, and perhaps we'll get into that, and I know we'll get into some of that during this discussion. But what hasn't kept up to date with the threats is actually the systems themselves, and often you're dealing with out-of-date systems which aren't really designed to think too hard about security, and those that are running them haven't always had to have security at the forefront of their mind, and this presents clear difficulties. There's a lot of cost involved in shutting down of key infrastructure points, very expensive and very difficult in terms of timing. Think about the average nuclear plant, perhaps possible to take it or shut it down to do some repair work maybe once every 18 months, and it becomes incredibly expensive in penalties that you'll incur for doing such things. So, unbelievable number of problems. I hope my panel today are going to shed some light on this, the realities of it, perhaps dispel the myth of the Hollywood disaster film, or actually reveal that this is incredibly true, and this is what we should be having nightmares about when we're sleeping in our beds. So we've got 4 venerable speakers with us today. Firstly, we have Gulshan Rai, who's the Director General of the... Sure, no problem. What we might do is we just might reverse the order so that just because we've had 45 minutes taken away from our time, that's absolutely fine. When the slides are ready, yes, absolutely, no problem. So we have Dr. Gulshan Rai, Director General of the Indian CERT. Second, we have Yoko Onita, the Principal Researcher of Japan Safe Security Crisis Management. Have Andy Cheadle to my right, Chief Engineer for BAE Applied Intelligence. And then last but not least, we have Sheriff Hashem, who is the Vice President of Cybersecurity, National Telecommunications Regulatory Authority, Egypt. And I advise you all to go and have a look at their bios and see how incredibly impressive their backgrounds, educations, and expertise is in this area. So, could I just ask at the back of the room, has the PowerPoint been put up? Are we ready to go? Because if not, I might just quickly reverse the order so that in the interest of time. What we're intending to do is give each of the speakers about 5 minutes apiece to make some opening remarks and comments, and I'm going to be really quite strict with limiting that because we have now lost quite a lot of time, and then really get into a bit of question and answer session with the panel, and I advise you to ask any pertinent questions you feel may be brewing in your minds. So, is the PowerPoint ready? If not, I'm going to move on. Excellent. Okay, please. Dr. Rai.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman, for giving the opportunity. First thing, I thought the issues I'll put on the table concerning the protection of CII, which is a topic which is very important. Last year I came here. I was invited by the ORF, and during the lecture, before the lecture, my topic was changed, so I was not sure what I'm going to, whether it's this time also my topic is going to be changed or I'm going to stick. But still, I carry my few slides of presentation so that issue should be clear and put on the table. There is a paradigm shift in the last couple of years there. You see, yesterday the entire information used to be under control of the government there, and the industries and the business houses were having little. There was a conventional triangle which we see in our day-to-day life. But this entire thing has shifted. It's a pyramid has shifted there. Now the federal government or the state governments or the government bodies have very little information, and the larger part of the information operations are handled by the industry and the business houses there. This is a scenario. It's not applicable to one country, but it's applicable to almost the entire world and India too. Large part of the CII is now being operated by the private sector. And this scenario poses its own challenge on the topic which we are discussing. Next. Now, if you look at why the CII, we talk about it, why the CII is important, because it's interconnection with many processes, with many technology, with many sectors, with many disciplines there. For example, you should look at the agriculture itself. You see the connectivity to the water, transportation, energy, banking, chemical, dams. What complex connectivity comes up if you see the diagram which I have tried to put it there. In fact, I have made it simpler, but the connectivity is quite difficult. And similarly, look at the healthcare. See the connectivity on different sectors. Today there is no critical infrastructure which is standalone, independent, but they're all interconnected and in complex interconnected. Next. Now the issues which we are facing in this area are slightly different or more complex than we face in the normal ICT sectors there. There are limited number of suppliers world over who supplies the CII. There will be different component supplier, but if you look at the entire systems, there are very limited number of people who supplies that. The complexities are more because many of the processes are hard-coded on the system itself there. The multiple technologies ranging from the electronics to mechanical, electromechanical, sensors, transducer need to be integrated and driven by the system there. The proprietary technology there, largely proprietary technology, though they are trying to introduce some open standards and use of general purpose ICT to drive it there. That's a recent trend. But by and large, it's driven by at the heart of it is a proprietary technology. Slow-moving technology, and there is a slow rate of response to upgrade the technology there. Then quick evolving threat, because the larger system, the open system getting integrated, and the threats are evolving. The chairman himself mentioned about the Stuxnet there, and after we saw the Nitro, Duco, and what all flame, we saw the things there. So these are the complex, these are the issues which we are facing, and that's why they make the CI to be more important for us to look at it. Next. What are the specific issues we look at when you talk about the protection of CII? Is a physical security is as much important as the cyber security when you talk about CII. The environmental security, then the security patching and the antivirus kind of upgradation with the network security, the security policies, procedures, and audits, security operations, and the cyber security management. These are the issues which concerns the CII, and each one of them has its own area of operation, has its own issues and an operation there. Next. How this issue is being tackled in the country, what we are planning, India is planning that. we notified our national cybersecurity policy in July 2013 there. The protection of critical information infrastructure is a thrust area, is an important point for us. Accordingly, we have developed the crisis management plan, which is being implemented and being enforced, also audited by the government together with the CII. The policy facilitates the identification, notification, assessment, and remediation of the protection of the critical information infrastructure. The implementation of global security policies. We are not put a country-specific policies. We have implemented the government, the global security practices there. Validation of the product which are applied in the CII, and in this regard, India got recognized as the consuming nation as well as certifying nation for this in the area of cybersecurity by the Common Criteria Association there. Then we have the security audit mandatory, certification of security rights, and the secure application. This is the policy which specify all aspects of the security which we need to protect the critical information infrastructure is all defined in the policy. Next. Now, how we are preparing ourselves to CII? It's a drills. We do conduct drills, not only within the country, but we are conducting the drills along with the other countries, Asian countries and the US also. We're working with them to conduct a drill. Almost 2 drills in a year we conduct, and we create awareness, we prepare our critical sector for the protection and for any exigencies or thing. The sectoral cert. The National Critical Information Infrastructure Center has been set up, and they're working with the critical sector both within the country as well as outside the country to protect the systems, to evolve the systems, and they're working together to evolve a plan for the protection of the critical information infrastructure. Crisis management plan, I said, it is already there. There are laws. IT Information Technology Act provides the legal provisions for the protection of critical information infrastructure. The public-private partnership, the risk cooperation, and the certification audit, that's what we are working with them. And we are trying to see the experience of other countries, information sharing, information days. We do send our people in some other countries to train them, expose them in the protection of critical information infrastructure, and to learn how to implement the best practices which they have adopted it. Next. This thought I'll share with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ryan, and sticking to time is much appreciated in this instance. So moving on to our next speaker, Yoko Nita, please.
Thank you. Again, thank you so very much for the kind introduction, and I'm very, very happy to be here. My first time ever to be in India. So anyway, we are running out of time, so let me get to the core. All right. Of course, this session is about critical infrastructure. Of course, I'm referring to that, but I'd love to share our experiences on March 11th, 2011, because our sort of critical infrastructure totally attacked on that day, and in terms of the cyber things. So I could share the real story. It's not like a Die Hard 4.0, but I was working on a desk. It happened at 2:46 p.m. in the afternoon, so everybody's working, not sleeping there. But I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Okay, good. All right. So as you know, that Japan is an island, and the huge, the massive earthquake, like above magnitude 6. Occurring in the world. The 20% of it is happening in Japan anyway. And also, we do have the active faults. There are 2,000 active faults in Japan, and there are more than 110 active volcanoes anyway. So this is really, the critical infrastructure issue. So what happened on that day? The March 11th. We were talking about, of course, the internet things, right? Critical infrastructure. But, the cyber. But in Japan, more than 95% of the telecommunication is going through the marine cables. So on that day, many of the marine cables are, surrounded by the earthquake-affected areas, were hit. I mean, it was completely broken down. But fortunately, because we do have the very good technology system to protect the data system. So no data was damaged at all, even in affected areas. But also, the marine cables were damaged, so internet shut down. But like Twitter's and Facebook, their main server are in the United States, and it's not damaged, so we could communicate through them anyway. So my point is that Japan has pretty much good data center system. But although we were suffering from rotating blackouts for a while after the earthquake, and also the commercial power supply, for the Japanese business industries, manufacturing and plants and factories, and they had to shut down for a couple of days because of the short of the commercial power supply. So since then, the Japanese governments, private sectors, academia, all of these, the Japanese citizens, we totally changed our mindset. We have to redesign the, our, mindset towards the risk. How to, secure all the marine cables, and then maybe, of course, internet, and then also the mobiles. And the mobiles totally shut down. So, based on this sort of the best practice, crisis management that we had, in a cybersecurity strategy was launched last year, and we are working hard on the mainly on a critical infrastructure. And it's the second year, but we already have the third critical infrastructure action plan to strengthen the information security, information sharing system about, all those things. I'm not going to explain in details, but we are strengthening a public-private partnership, like interagencies, cooperation in, to define the roles of relevant agencies, and also Japan is strengthening the international partnership, all the things, and also we are now, focusing on more like R&D, research and development plans. What kind of equipment or what kind of system we should have, towards the next natural disaster, because we never know what's going to happen tomorrow. But we are now working on, and we have the very good CSSC, Control Security Service Center. So it's now located in the affected area. And we got the accredited system. That's the first one in Asian regions, Asian countries. So we have the kind of the test bed center, simulation center, and we do have the many projects for the R&D to protect the critical infrastructure. So I'm not going to explain in details, but we do have it, and it's like third year now, and we are working on, and all those the critical infrastructure, business industries, and other Japanese industries which are interested. More than 80 corporations, joined the CSSC system. So it's really good, I think. Maybe I should stop here, right? Mm-hmm. I'm gonna if I have time, I'm gonna talk about CBM something like that.
So thank you very much, Yoko. We've now had two perspectives of a government nature, understanding a little bit about India's systems and also Japan's response to that horrendous disaster. And now, time to bring in the private sector, and Andy Cheadle, please.
Good morning. I'd like to start by thanking, on behalf of BAE Systems, the event organisers and our hosts for the opportunity to be a part of these conference and debates that have been happening over the past couple of days, and I hope this one will be as lively. Many of you will know BAE Systems as a munitions manufacturer, airplanes, battleships, etc. Fewer know the Applied Intelligence Division, which is a 3,000-strong national security and cybersecurity division spanning financial fraud, cybersecurity, and communications intelligence. And we've been, as a division, we've been working in that area for about 40 years. Given the nature of the work we do, we're one of the most attacked organisations in the world. So in terms of our credentials, we use our own cyber services and solutions to protect ourselves as well as our clients across government, defence and aerospace, financial services, CNI utilities, which is electricity and gas, oil, gas and natural resources, and the legal sector. And the reason I highlight those sectors is because we deem them to be part of critical national infrastructure and critical information infrastructure systems. BAE Systems is the greatest industrial contributor of threat intelligence to the US Department of Defence and the UK government CERT. We are one of only 4 organisations in the UK certified by CESG and CPNI to respond to cyber incidents. In our experience, the securing of critical information infrastructure is a key element of each nation's national cyber policy. And so it's really the reconciliation of the protection of CII with national cyber policy and national cyber network defence that I want to discuss today. The OECD National Cyber Policy Review captures 6 elements of a national mandate. I'm going to skip them because of time, except for one, which is the protection of critical information infrastructure, which says, recognise specific business players or sectors to be part of national critical infrastructure. Partner with internet service providers to address malware, virus, botnet, and criminal threats to their subscribers and business customers, and conduct cybersecurity exercises, including across borders, noting that the internet is borderless. If we look at how the UK chose to implement its policy 5 or so years ago, it identified key CNI organisations, whether they be crucial to delivering public and infrastructure services, or major organisations contributing to our financial prosperity. The idea being that if these key organisations are protected and GCHQ operates the defensive international cyber mission, then the UK is secure and safe. If I wind forward to today, other nations with which we work not only identify the CNI organisations and expect them, and note I say expect them, so there's a voluntary element to that, to monitor themselves at the enterprise level, the corporate level, but we also help them to build and establish their national cyber security operations centres to realise their vision of a cyber secure nation. The role of the NSOC is key to implementing these nations' national cyber policy and securing their national infrastructure, with the following key roles and elements. In the first, to set the standards at a national level for SOCs, for government and CNI organisations, and provide wider national leadership. Secondly, to create and enhance the shared situational awareness of network vulnerabilities, threats and events across government and critical national infrastructure, and to disseminate the results. Thirdly, to orchestrate national protection, prevention, mitigation and recovery activities associated with significant, and because it's the national SOC, that's why they're significant, cyber incidents to improve the national cyber defence posture. To provide national discovery, analysis, characterisation, and crucially, the most difficult bit, the attribution of the cyber threats and the attackers. To strengthen the future cybersecurity environment by developing indigenous skills and supporting knowledge transfer and development and sharing. And finally, to cooperate with international partners to share threat intelligence and respond to incidents. And when we deploy our blueprint for a national SOC, we recognise the SOC to consist of 4 key organisations. The Security Operations Division, providing situational awareness of the current threat landscape, monitoring to detect advanced threats at a national scale, threat intelligence to maintain and share the threat picture, and active defence through the management of security devices. Secondly, the Technical Services Division, providing an ability to respond to sophisticated attacks, forensic and malware laboratories, penetration testing to assist in identifying security weaknesses across government and CNI organisations, and architectural services to provide support and advice to other SOCs. Thirdly, the Business Operations Division, the relation management interface to government and CNI organisations, providing project onboarding for integrating new SOCs into the NSOC and rolling out new services. IT services to support users within the NSOC, and the service desk to manage data ingestion and support the secure transfer of incident data and threat intelligence to and from the NSOC. And the policy and compliance solution to ensure that the SOCs and the NSOCs remain aligned. And finally, the fourth division, the Capability Development Division, including integration and testing facilities for introducing new technology and techniques, tech research to support the development of new tech capabilities, people development for SOC staff knowledge and skills, and note the integration and testing facility also functions as the training SOC to support staff capability development for the NSOC and SOCs. The challenges in creating such an advanced security operations centre are as follows. Performing threat detection at scale, so the deployment of advanced security monitoring able to create a holistic view at a national level and thereby detect and investigate the most sophisticated cyber attacks at scale. Secondly, SOC federation, operational integration between government and CNI SOCs and networks in order to create shared situational awareness without the need to replicate vast amounts of data at the NSOC. Thirdly, what we call mid-space exploitation, which is the use of infrastructure and data from communication service providers, from telcos, and international internet gateways in order to enrich the intelligence picture, to improve situational awareness and monitor for attack proliferation, and to defend and block incoming attacks. Thirdly, threat intelligence, staying ahead of the most sophisticated threats by integrating, maintaining, and disseminating both a tactical and strategic picture of the threat landscape. Secure communications, supporting secure communications and controlled information sharing between the NSOC and the government CNI SOCs. So in the event of an incident being detected, communications can take place without the risk of alerting adversaries. And then incident response, the ability to respond to sophisticated attacks. And finally, people development, the development of essential knowledge and skills required not only within the NSOCs, but within the government and CNI organisations. And we've heard a lot over the past couple of days on the need for multi-stakeholderism and a coordinated democratic cyber policy framework, development and implementation for India. Clearly, this is very necessary. However, it will take time, and whilst under development, advanced and persistent cyber attacks are ever ongoing. So I want to finish by contrasting the original UK national policy implementation of identifying those key CNI organisations with that of those nations that build national SOCs and federated SOCs to protect theirs. That original UK approach provides tactical quick wins, assuming the commercial CNI organisations recognise the threats and are willing to play ball, and allows the strategic implementation of a national policy to be developed and implemented in slower time. As a result, I'll close by suggesting that given all we've heard, this approach might be one suited to India. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. You started off making a very interesting point, actually, which is as BAE Systems, you suffer a huge number of attacks, actually, and of course size isn't everything here, but I think there's a lot of governments who look very enviably at the private sector and the size of the CERT teams that they can deploy. I mean, I use the Australian example. The Australian CERT team is about 20 people. Then you look at the Commonwealth Bank, one of the largest banks in Australia. They have 100 plus people on their CERT team. Take that up another level to a multinational like Lockheed Martin. They have a CERT team of 400 plus. So I think there's a lot to be learned from the way that the private sector have experienced these issues. So last but not least, Dr. Sharif Hassem, Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here on this panel. To really try to recap on some of the critical issues that were raised about CIIP, critical information infrastructure protection. Here, I'd like to start off by saying, how can a country identify what's critical? Because, again, the focus and the interoperability nature of having several stakeholders involved here requires setting priorities. So what's critical for the country? Is it oil? Is it gas? Is it transportation, healthcare, and others? So identifying the critical sectors and going about really defining the roles and responsibilities in a very complex environment. We have seen from the Indian case the complexities, even healthcare, electricity, the banking, the financial sector, government services, and so on. They are interlinked. Nothing can really reflect this more in terms of cyber threats than what happened in Estonia in 2007 when Estonia suffered an attack by some actors, whether they are state or non-state actors. To date is still unknown, but yet it crippled many of their infrastructure for a few days. That was actually an eye-opener for many countries, including Egypt. We have been discussing cyber threats over the past 10 years or so, but the Estonian case helped us establish a strong case that we need to act at a central level, at a high level, establishing a CERT and having a national view of what CIIP is all about, and to make sure that the stakeholders are involved. There are, different modes of operation. There is the firefighting mode in case of an attack happens, but to protect CIIP, we realized that the proactive role is really requires a lot of preparatory actions and plans to be set in place before we face an attack. And actually we have seen attacks in the Middle East over the past 5 years that really, even the more ready countries, like in Saudi Arabia, the Aramco case, which is really an eye-opener in the petroleum industry. Aramco is well known for having a high-tech technology, platform, skills, money, financial resources, and so forth. Yet 30,000 computers were wiped out in 1 week. And that's something that we use these cases really to say that we have to be ready. We have to be ready for the unexpected and really to make sure that we have enough resources, especially the skilled force, in terms of capacity building and having this capacity building ready. Because while you can buy equipment, you can purchase systems, but to have the people who are able to run these systems is quite challenging, and to make sure that decision makers are aware of really their role in this responsibility shared scheme or framework is very important, because sometimes, we are fortunate in the cybersecurity profession that people realize that security is important. But when it comes to allocating funds, allocating resources, hiring new staff, there is a problem. We face the typical question of return on investment. We're investing so much in security. So how can you justify spending money if we don't see historically some catastrophe? Then why are you pessimistic, expecting the unexpected and spending money, wasting these money, like what happened in the Y2K problem, for instance? People spend tons of money, and it's very hard to justify if no attack happens. And you hope that nothing happens. That's the best case scenario for us. So how do you balance these challenges? In the operational framework, when we talk about critical information infrastructure, we talk about also industrial control systems, SCADA systems. We have seen what happened in Iran. We have seen what happened in Qatar. And in certain environments, they say, well, we have an air gap. We are not linked to the internet, so we are safe. And I've seen this in Egypt over the past years. Nowadays, with Stuxnet, with other viruses, it's not the case. These installations, they are very attractive for whoever wants to attack, and the damage could be catastrophic for countries, especially when it comes to operational environments like in energy sector and healthcare and others. Partnerships are key to face this attack. in addition to preparing at the national level the skills, the capacity building programs, the frameworks for operation, whether it's a SOC or a high-level coordinating committees and so forth. Also internationally, linking with other stakeholders who can help you. The Estonian case is obvious. Estonia reached out to neighboring countries and friendly countries to face this attack on their critical infrastructure, and it was very effective, according to the Estonians. We try to bridge really these links with other certs at the professional level, at the bilateral, multilateral levels. We participate in international events, and actually coming here is part of this to really reach out to other communities and make sure that professionals can work together in a preparatory, proactive mode rather than just a reactive mode. There are lots of dilemmas that I'm sure that we'll get to in terms of attribution, dealing with it, who's attacking what, and so forth, and to make sure that we have the right paradigm in terms of the regulatory, framework. Do we set standards? Do we require compliance, or is it more voluntarily, actions? And we have seen different models tried by different states, and there are pros and cons here, but these are issues that countries need to address, and the solutions need to be developed within the same country, with the same internally, with really all the consequences weighed out. Security is about managing risks and managing expectations. There are lots of risks. We have learned as human beings to deal with these risks and to make sure that we have enough scenarios set in ahead of time to deal with these risks. Also managing expectations. Some countries, some colleagues actually, especially in other non-ICT sectors, say, oh, we have a cert, we shouldn't worry. No, you should worry more if that's your attitude. And the point is the cert can do so much for you. And having the strategy in place is fine, but really it's expectation, and if you anticipate a lot of hostilities or attack from internal or otherwise, you should also allocate enough resources to deal with these problems ahead of time, because if you have a crisis, it's not the right time for planning during a crisis. So you should have the right formulas set in place. Statistics could be also a good tool of measuring where you are, where you want to be, but they can also be misleading. If you are talking about thousands of incidents, well, one incident like what happened in Aramco or the Qatari gas is just one incident, but it was catastrophic to them and in some of the operational aspects of things. And if it affects critical infrastructure, then statistics need to be carefully weighed. What can you endure and what you cannot. I'll end right here with a point or a reference to the Die Hard 4.0 scenario. Well, a few years ago when there was leakage of the designs of the F-35I fighter jet, and I recalled Bruce Willis being chased by the F-16. So, is it relevant or not? Fortunately, Egypt doesn't produce aircraft, so it's not as critical as BA or others. But this is really scenarios that we need to look at in realistic terms, based on the country's needs and so forth, and to make sure that we have enough resources allocated ahead of time. Thank you.
Well, thanks to my wonderful panelists for all sticking to time. You've done a marvellous job there. Apologies that sometimes it had to be quite short. Interestingly, there's a fascinating report, if you haven't already seen it, the US Defense Science Board report, kind of exempling many areas of defense capability that have been exploited over the last few years. Good reading if you ever have time. I just firstly want to open up and take my prerogative as chair to ask a question of all panelists, but just to challenge something that you said, Sharif, which is that people know that security is important. And I just wanted to challenge that on the front of experience, which is when you're dealing with certain utility sectors, often they don't really understand that security is something that should be at the forefront of their mind, and neither do they think that it's of a financial benefit for them to actually prioritize it and spend the money that's perhaps required. And that then links into something else that a few of our panelists have discussed, which is around education. And one of the big air gaps that exists, I still think, and I'd be interested on your views from a country perspective and also from, Andy, your perspective on dealing with various different organizations. How do you go about educating policymakers to a point that they can make decisions and funding allocation in a significant manner? So please, Sharif, as I've challenged you, you can kick off if that's okay.
Sure, thank you. And you mentioned two words which are quite challenging in one sentence: education and policymakers. Because I've seen cases here where people think, well,
Careful
we
on
are
the policy
decision
one.
makers. We have all the education that we need, which is really dangerous. There is also the state of denial and the state of panic. If you talk to somebody who has not experienced an attack, they have a state of denial approach where this will never happen to us. We're okay. We operate in a safe environment. But they turn quickly to a state of panic once they start witnessing an attack. And that's one thing which really need to be highlighted when you address security things. And really, we need to have the right balance here. You don't want people panicking. At the same time, denial, we have seen in utility companies, they say, well, engineers were very enthusiastic about having access to their control systems over the internet because they can see the process online, but guess who else is seeing the process? And the potential attackers. And when you get this information to them, they don't know what to do about it. And you send it to the CEO of the company and they say, well, we refer you to customer service. We're not there for customer service. It's not a complaint. It's just a vulnerability that you have in your system. So again, back to your point about education. I don't know if the other panelists would have best practices here, but it's quite challenging.
I'd certainly like to turn to Dr. Ryan and just say, what's the state of play in India in terms of educating the policymakers and the broader utility sector?
Thank you. I made the presentation just to highlight the complications and the complexities in the entire production of CII, and because the different technologies. I think the primemost thing is that first realization, the complexity of the CII and preparing the policies. With respect to, I certainly agree with my friend that the awareness and the capacity building is far more important in this sector if we really have to go a long way in production of the critical information infrastructure. The second part is that most of the development when it comes is largely in the area of general purpose ICT. You don't find different tools to the auditing the specialized systems which we employ, which deploy those systems. So we need to have a very clear-cut policy, first with respect to the awareness, capacity development, where the cooperation, international cooperation need to come. The second part is the research and development for the forensic or for the audit or for preparing those systems to check it, because we can't afford to have it more downtime for those critical information infrastructure. The policy is to have the best practices implemented and necessary tools or systems should be there, necessary systems should be there to implement those policies. I think those things are far more important and we need to give a priority in this regard.
So Andy, tell us, how do you get the customer to pay attention and open the wallet?
So I just wanted to echo Sharif. When we meet organisations to sell cyber solutions, even if they're actually compromised and I rock up and say, you've got 3,000 bots operating within your organisation, they ask, does it matter? Is it impacting me? No, it's affecting someone else. They're just exploiting my infrastructure. And I kind of turn to them and say, well, they're not impacting you today, but you've been infiltrated, so they could exploit you. But still, they're in a state of denial. So unless the customers have really had an incident affect them, then people do tend to view cyber as a bit of an insurance policy. And the longer you go without an incident, the longer you wonder why you're paying for it. In terms of educating policy, I don't tend to do that because as a technologist, the only way I know how is to show our technology. But people, I'd kind of like to answer it with a quote from Ian Loban, who's the director of GCHQ. And he said, our professional rule of thumb is that good information assurance practice will solve 80% of cybersecurity vulnerabilities. But the scale of the challenge is changing, and the remaining 20% of the threat is complex and not easily addressed by just building the security walls higher and higher. And so a new approach is required.
And so you mentioned actually that sometimes it takes an event to shift mindset. So Yoko, I mean, what kind of step change have you seen? Terrible disasters that you've encountered.
Thank you very much. Quickly. Of course, on that day that we got through the earthquake. I mean, the Fukushima nuclear power plant was almost meltdown, right? So anyway, the policymakers really, learned many things because all those they are the people who would never ever had realized, Yoko, that would never happen to Japan. We wouldn't, it's not necessary for us to take, the initiative is to cyber drills or something like that. But now they learned, they have to do it, for their next election. They need a vote, right? But I think in Japan, the most headache for this critical infrastructure, education, system is for the business, leadership. The president, the CEOs of Japanese industries, because they don't want to, allocate, invest that kind of thing for the security, until they get attacked. And they don't want, they feel reluctant to share the information because, their stock, the market, stock price is going to fall down maybe the following morning. So I think in Japan, educating all those CEOs are the most, the critical issues in Japan. Yeah. And the Japanese government has a strategy for that.
Another example, actually, you mentioned Ian Lobban, his speech, the Australian Signals Directorate have come out with the top 35 mitigation strategies, and apparently the top 4 of those, if they're implemented, will I think, disperse 80% of issues too. But again, those need constant updating. And if you're a company trying to implement those, often if you're an SME, you can't afford to actually implement those. It's going to cost a lot of money to actually make the changes and constantly patch your, in the right way to be able to mitigate against these issues. Now, I'm happy to take questions if anyone's raising a hand. Look at that, I'm opening the floodgates. I'm going to go straight down to the end of the table there. If I could just ask you we've got about 10 minutes left, so please, I'll take a few in one go.
So I have John Mallory, MIT. So 2 questions. One, in the United States, one of the major policy initiatives has been the NIST cybersecurity framework and associated executive orders. So I'm wondering, if the panelists have any reactions to that in terms of sort of a best practice document and the sort of voluntary self-regulation approach that it offers, or thoughts about what maybe in other countries have done that maybe have gone beyond that. So that's one piece. The other piece is, and it's great that we've had in this panel a discussion of what we'll say is, increased information assurance to address vulnerabilities and so forth, and also resilience. But to the extent that there's a residual risk that you can't handle with either of those, do the panelists have any thoughts on the kinds of protections they would like to see developed under some of the international law discussions? Thank you.
I'm going to take a question right next to you then.
So my question is regarding a supply chain attack. While you can prevent your systems, the CII systems, against a cyber attack, however, it is very difficult to detect malware which has been embedded while the system was under production. In a country like India, where there is virtually no facility to test a system before it is made operational, neither the hardware nor the software, how do we go about protecting the CII in such a scenario?
Let's take those first 3 questions in one, and then if we've got time, we'll take another set of questions again. Perhaps if we start with the last one first, looking at supply chain issues, you could probably point to many examples around the world of supply chain issues and the kinds of international difficulties that's caused at the diplomatic level now. How do you deal with those? How do you mitigate against those? I'm seeing Dr. Ryan looking quite eager to answer this one. So.
No, I do agree with this gentleman that there are issues to supply chain management system. Yes, India's facilities are still much educated there, and that's why I said in my short presentation that we got ourselves recognized as a certificate issuing nation and consuming nation, and we have set up one laboratory at Kolkata, and we are trying to set up laboratories in the public-private sector, both not in the government sector to do that, but it's a real challenge to do that. And the other thing I said that you say there are not enough tools to, not only in India, it's a worldwide, this is the issue that the tools are a problem. The only solution which my friend said that is if we implement the best practices, 80% of the issues can be resolved. I 100% agree, and that's one of the way to check those things. But we need to have a safeguard. This is the issue. Certainly, this is an issue.
Andy, did you want to come in on that topic?
So, protecting CII supply chains. I'm going to reference our kind of model of operation within our cyber portfolio, which is it has a prepare phase, a protect phase, a monitor, and a respond. The prepare phase is essentially a consultancy service that looks at active attack assessment and also things like the supply chains. So you actually go out and look at where the weak links in the supply chain are. And then that follows into the next phase, which is the protection. So protection may be for SCADA networks, network segmentation, but it might be minimizing your supply chain. It might be changing out suppliers. It might be looking at their references, etc. And then in the monitoring phase, monitoring how your supply chain interacts with your business operations. It's not just the monitoring of the physical networks. And response, remediation services. So that's how we as a company deal with the supply chain issue. On the 80-20 thing, so 80%, I view national cyber network defense to have three parts, which is one, defend from the known bad or the known signature attacks. Two, defend from denial of service attacks, which can either be known or unknown. And that falls into the third of APT attacks, advanced persistent threats, which are unknown and advanced and persistent, so long-term by their very nature. The Snake campaign has run since 2004 and is still ongoing. Those kind of advanced persistent threats fall into that 20% that Ian Lobbin was talking about. And the response of the community has been to stop looking at signatures and to build behavioral attack models that associate risk scores with different behaviors seen within the organizations that come under attack. And it's based on those behavioral models backed by, in our case, big data analytics and trait scoring that allows us to find those unknown unknowns, and we're really quite effective at it. Or at least that's what I've been told. So,
thank you, Andy. Yoko, did you want to add something to that? And then, Sharif, if I could maybe move on to the first two questions that we received, I might point those to you. But please,
just quickly. Well, I just touched upon the CSSC, Control System Security Center. It's really working hard on it. It has implementations a lot, and so I think the CSC, of course, is a capacity to mitigate and to prevent things, and also the regarding a global supply chain that we also went through the experiences on a day. So Japan has been diffusing the supply chains, within Japan. So I think that works for the business continuity plan. Okay, right.
Sharif, what kind of impact did the US NIST framework have in your mind? I mean, it was certainly, it's a large-scale effort like which we haven't seen for kind of trying to engage the private sector and prioritise it at a national level. So what are your reflections on that?
Well, let me not limit my answer to just the NIST framework. It's important. We look at NIST. NIST has been really phenomenal in highlighting quite a few things. And I have to also emphasize the need, and I'll go back to one of the last questions about certification of hardware and software. And it's an ongoing process. It's not one-time thing. And many of the problems with the industrial control system is that the system is set up maybe 10, 15 years ago, and it was certified then based on known vulnerabilities. Then everybody forgot about it. And I've seen cases even in developed countries where really certain links, back doors were left there after the development, not intentionally, but they were left because people who were responsible there finished their job and didn't close the back door. So certification is a challenge, especially for developing countries, because we don't have enough resources to do the certification all the time. So we have to set priorities and make sure also set expectations, because I mean there is a balance there on the resources that need to be deployed and also the risk that you face. When it comes to compliance, there are also a paradigm that says, well, let's leave it to the private sector to decide what to do. That's good, I mean, in terms of the partnership that exists, but in certain cases you need this government regulatory paradigms to be there. So what's the right balance? Again, it varies from one country to another and one period to the other. So having these in mind is very important to have, I mean, within the strategy, and it is not, again, setting up a cybersecurity or a CIIP strategy is an ongoing process, and you need to review this at the country level regularly.
Dr. Rai, please.
See, the issue is, I mean, we should not look at the issue of supply chain management in an isolation system there. You may check the system in an individual or as a self-independent system there, but actually it comes up when they are interconnected together. Not only interconnected together, but where they are regularly to be maintained and updated over there. That's the issue comes up there. And the issue is entire evolving a system where we can test the system, whether it is working offline or online. That's the way we need to look at it, and that's a great challenge there. So we need to look at not only supply chain, but as an integrated system over the life of the...
I think, so I mentioned prepare, protect, monitor and respond.
Yes.
And that is we draw it as a circle because it is a continuum that you can enter at any phase and must keep actively maintaining and progressing.
So being an abusive chair, what I'm going to do is offer up the services of all my panelists to all of you as willing answerers of questions in the next break time. But I'm going to use my prerogative. Look, when you come to these conferences, what do you want? You always want something which you can go home with just to make you think about, and what are the future issues, what are the things that you should be thinking about in your jobs and in your academic lives. So what I want is each of the panelists to give you what they think are very, very quickly, what is the key concern that people should be thinking about in the near future around the whole issue of CIIs? Please, if I start to my right. Dr. Rai, if you can.
I think the key issue certainly we'll have to do that is a more cooperation is required among the all stakeholders, whether it's the government, and government need to work more closely with the public and private sector in all aspects. We can't find a single answer for all the issues there, and I don't think we'll be able to find a solution for all the problem at any point. And the problem will keep on coming because technology is evolving and innovations there. So the best is that we need to work consistently and regularly work together and try to address the issues, not both within the country, but domestically, but internationally across the globe.
Andy.
I gave 7 challenges for the NSOC, so threat detection at scale, SOC federation, the mid-space integration, threat intelligence, secure comms, incident response, and people development. And although, you know, as a supplier of solutions, we want to sell stuff that addresses those top 6 concerns. Actually, the one that I think needs most concentration is the people development, because the threat levels and the number of threats are increasing, at least in their advanced nature and persistence, regardless of the actual number of those threats. But the number of analysts and the highly skilled realm in which and technical nature of the cybersecurity domain means that actually there's quite a limited aperture for the market to access talented individuals that can work in this area and actually can implement the policy and protect the threats. So I'd leave it with people development.
Here's my 5 pence worth as having both parents as teachers: education of the public, education of the utilities who are delivering these services, and most important of all, education of the politicians.
Yeah. So in Japan case, you know, we have to we have to get ready for the the next natural disaster, because this is cyber opportunistic, the cyber terrorist game. So that happened many times. So we have to, and we've learned. So we have to get ready for that. And also, this is a national security threat. So geopolitically and geographically, Japan is in the middle, right? So we have to monitor. We have to observe, what they're thinking, what their approach is, that kind of thing. And also, we have to enhance and promote more and for R&D, and also how to train. How to obtain the human resources for this. Thank you.
Sherry.
Okay, well, if I would summarize the highlights here is awareness and coupled with education are very critical. Awareness of the complexities, the interdependencies, the emerging challenges of having Internet of Things, of having people bringing their own devices to work, of having systems that are isolated, that they think that they are okay, but they're not. These are really challenges. Awareness of the role of policymakers. These are critical components of really having a successful implementation of critical information infrastructure protection policies. R&D is important for every country, whether it is developing or developed. Japan mentioned this a couple of times. In Egypt, we rely on R&D, whether it is from a technology point of view or from a cultural point of view. There are certain patterns of behaviors and certain professional circles that need to be addressed from an R&D point of view. And this, again, need to be put in the public so that the public is aware, everybody, the stakeholders, private sector, public sector, national, international, need to be aware of their roles. There was a mention earlier on the GGE, the UN level, and definitely this is something that we have to highlight within our countries. Thank you.
So I apologize to those that didn't get to ask questions. I apologize to my panelists for having not had quite so much time to speak. But I'll congratulate myself as chair for having brought us in exactly on time as I was demanded to. But look, please, in all seriousness, if you could thank all of the panelists for sharing their expertise. Thank you for engaging as well.